Hello, everyone. This is Matthew Silman, your fairly regular host for Radio Rowe. I'm here today talking with Alana Burke about her upcoming program online with Rowe Camp and Conference Center, which is starting March 22nd, if I recall, 4 weeks class, and it's called Empathetic Influence Foundations of Change Leadership with Alana Burke, who I'm talking to, which is pretty handy. Thanks for coming, Alana. Before we jump into it, though, to talk about whatever we're going to talk about, the way I start most of these conversations is I'm going to show you this book called Home Ground Language for a Landscape, edited by Barry Lopez. And I'd love for you to pick a number between 10 and 390. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read you the short description of this geographical feature and just have you reflect on something that you find yourself in with it.
Okay, 14.
14. That's easy. It's right near the beginning. It's right after. Here we go. So here's the word. It's atoll, Atoll. An atoll is a mid-ocean coral reef, roughly circular in shape or sometimes open-ended like a horseshoe, that encloses a lagoon. An atoll, the term originates in the Maldive Islands, may be miles in circumference or may be surmounted by, or more rarely, surround low sand and coral islets. Before he'd ever seen an atoll, Charles Darwin, while aboard the Beagle, relied on ship captains' charts and descriptions of oceanic islands to come up with a beautifully simple theory of atoll formation. Whereas volcanic islands wear down and subside after eruptions cease, Darwin surmised that their fringing coral reefs continue to grow. These reefs will remain, he argued, if their upward growth can keep pace with island subsidence, and if sediments accumulate on or within them to form sand or coral islets. And it wasn't until the U.S. Navy drilled more than a mile deep in the coral formation on Inwentok Atoll in the Marshall Islands in 1952, reaching the atoll's submerged basalt foundation in preparing for the world's first hydrogen bomb test, that Darwin was proved right. Kure Atoll in the Hawaiian archipelago is the northernmost atoll in the world. It lies close to what is called the Darwin Point, the latitude at which coral growth can no longer keep up with an island sinking under its own weight. So, when you hear that description, where does atolls or mid-ocean ridges or islands, anything about that somehow, what reflections might you have? Where does it take you?
Uh, First of all, I love how you begin. I think because the topic of the day is the course that we're running, right?
Mm-hmm.
My mind immediately goes to a bit of a metaphor about change leadership in an atoll is roughly the underwater island that continues to grow and continues to become new things. And it's also very fragile. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that leadership is very much that way, especially in the times that we're in right now. Understanding how to lead is different than it's ever been, and what leadership looks like through constant change. Like we are in constant change. And I think that's those corollaries that fits for me. I think atolls are really fascinating. Like I used to live in Hawaii many years ago, and just the idea of just islands and the ocean and atolls specifically, like they need so much nourishment to survive, and the remote nature of them requires care from far-flung places. The more that we dump into our oceans, the less likely atolls are to survive. Like it requires leadership from places that we'll never even know it exists. It's like they're affected by that kind of the butterfly effect the world over.
Absolutely.
So I
Well,
think that leadership is
yeah.
much the same way, for good or bad. And understanding the power that we wield, I think, is really important.
Yeah, we'll get into it, and thanks for making the connection. And it's great that there was one. I certainly know about the time, some of the times that you were in Hawaii, but maybe you could say a few things about your time in Hawaii and some of the things that shaped your understanding of what leadership even is or the value of it. Not to say that you didn't have thoughts about it before, but something about the Hawaii/island experience that was part of your understanding of your formation of some of your ideas around this.
That's a really solid question. I grew up partially in Kauai. My dad moved there when I was 12, and it was shortly after Hurricane Iniki had completely decimated Kauai. People were still living on the beach, and I remember one of my earliest memories of Hawaii was there was a Volkswagen in a third floor window at the Hyatt. Because
Wow.
it was like they were barely in the midst of cleanup. And he moved into an apartment that didn't have windows, and he put it back together while living in it, you know? So it was an island that I got to see in flux over the time that he lived there. And I would go back every 4 to 5 months or so for visits. And then I spent long stretches there a couple different times over the years. And watching how quickly it grew and how quickly it turned into this incredible tourist destination that it evolved into. To say evolved is probably not apt, really. It was engineered into, is probably a better way to put it.
Hmm.
And living there long term and seeing the disparity of the kind of the performance that goes on for the tourists and spending extended periods of time in a place like that was really illuminating in my early years. I think it humbled a very young me in a way around how I thought about leadership and frankly being white in this place that it was hard to even call it part of America, especially when I first got there in 1993. It was like, it really was like living in a completely different country. You couldn't count on the water being clean. It was really a trip. Watching how it was engineered into this luxury tourist destination where movies were being filmed and also being the most remote of the islands. Kauai was the northernmost, and it was different from Maui and the Big Island and Oahu because they were all very established, as that's where all the tourists went. I watched as the economy changed and the way the government and leadership made it into this new economy and what happened to the local population as a result. And it was not good things. And
Yeah.
watching the kind of willful ignorance
Hmm.
of the wealthier white people that lived on the island, of not really looking at the disparity between both the white populace that lived there full time, that mostly had very high paying jobs and mostly real estate, and everyone else that
Hmm.
served the tourists. And as the native Hawaiian population got pushed further and further away from the beaches and further inland, and what Hawaiian culture really was compared to what was seen as Filipino culture was actually most of the people that you would meet in Kauai were Filipino. They were not Hawaiian. And so their culture became, people would interpret it as Hawaiian culture, but it wasn't. And all of that was like watching how, quote unquote, leadership was basically white people sitting in offices in far off places building beautiful hotels at the cost of a dying culture.
Hmm.
And it definitely formed how I saw the power of leadership. I was young. These were my teen years. I was naive and thought I knew everything. It was pre-college and pre-activism and the glow of the 90s. And
Of course, not your entire formation of understanding of leadership was formed there, but
no,
maybe unknowingly to you, some of these ideas were filtering through, which became part of your understanding later.
I think that it formed my sense of humility around leadership. I think that's really was the effect of being there, was recognizing that we are smaller than we think we are sometimes, and that when you have so much power to change so many lives and you do really shitty things with it, there's people pay, real people pay. And I saw that really happen and how Kauai shifted over that decade. Yeah, it
Thank
was a
you for
big
that.
deal. It's
Yeah,
part of my formative years for sure.
yeah, thank you for that. A little bit what I'm hearing you saying about your description of the leadership that you saw there is that it had a predetermined outcome that it was going for,
Hmm.
and how because of the fixed attention on that outcome coming to pass, the type of care for the people who are in and around it and affected by it weren't as considered. So, would it be fair to say that, not that I need to give you like and I would hold you to a particular definition of empathetic influence is, but in terms of the course, would it be fair to say that kind of what might be involved with understanding empathetic influence is not that you're just like, hey man, whatever happens is cool, but it's more we're pointing in a direction without a particular destination in point, being open to discovery, what happens along the way, to see what the consequences of your action and the actions around you are.
Yeah, I definitely think that's part of it. And for me, also, the idea of empathetic influence is that those two phrases are often considered almost mutually exclusive. If you are empathetic, then you aspire to not exert undue influence over other people, as if influence is a bad thing inherently. I
Right.
think, especially those of us that think of ourselves as good-hearted people, uh, tend to shy away from the concept of influence as if it is a negative manipulation of other people. And I think when you bring those two concepts together, it changes how we think about them. So, not just about a fixed or unfixed destination of where you're leading people. It's, I think, and that is certainly part of it, but it's also recognizing that we have a level of responsibility to look at our influence and understand it and recognize that in order to wield it responsibly, we have to really have an active understanding of both our influence and how we can show empathy for the people that our influence might affect along the way.
Now, thank you. And so I guess that makes another question because the term empathetic influence or influencer, which is its own sort of maybe slightly radioactive word in the social media space, um,
Hmm.
someone might say, "I'm not an influencer. I'm not a leader," but it can have the sense of business or it can have the sense of activism in a very particular way. And my sense of in reading, not just knowing you, but also reading about the course, is that this isn't necessarily just for someone who runs a small business or runs a big business or is a leader of an activism or trying to do a particular type of do goody and properly do goody thing in the
Hmm.
world, that it might even be for people who work in much smaller spaces without, you don't have to be the leader of your local mutual aid or your local Rotary group. Maybe you could say a few things about your understanding of leadership and where it lives and what scope and scales you're talking about.
Yeah, thank you for asking that because that is something that is very much tied into my life's work, which is that leadership is something that it's such a loaded word. We all have these different associations with it. I've asked this question of many people over the years of like, when you think of leaders, who do you think of? And most people think of the hallmark people, the Obamas or Oprah, or like the people that are just easy to point at. And
Lee
they don't
Iacocca,
necessarily,
a
right?
CEO,
Right. Yeah.
Steve
We sort of
Jobs.
mistake
Yeah.
it for people who have a lot of power or influence. And that's not really, as far as I define it, and what I'm teaching in the course, is that's not really what leadership is. That leadership is much quieter and more powerful when we recognize that we all have a capacity to lead, even in the smallest ways. From if you are leading in your family unit, there's leadership to be found. And I think in the absence of understanding that, that's where we get into real trouble culturally. Like when we don't understand the power that we have and we shy away from the idea that we even have it to begin with, because leadership and power are so deeply tied together. And what I see a lot is, especially not to make this a big political discussion, but especially on the left, where there's this sort of idea that if you are a good person, you don't want power,
Hmm.
right? This sort of ingrained. Like if you're a good person, you do this dance where you pretend that you don't want power because you're out to help people. And if you want power, you then you don't want to help people. And I aim to change that because fundamentally, you need power in order to make positive change. And if you aspire to make any kind of positive change in any way, whether it's internally or externally or globally, you need to understand how to get power and how to wield power responsibly and with empathy and how to lead with it in a way that doesn't hurt people along the way. And I think that a lot of people, too many probably, pretend that leadership isn't something they need to learn or that
Hmm.
they already know how to do it. Leadership means taking charge. And that's not really what leadership is.
Right.
It's about responsibility and it's about empathy and there's so many other pieces to it. And it is about a deep look at your own values and understanding what those values really are and how they apply in your everyday life. So I definitely think that the scope of this course is truly, like, obviously business is my realm and where I make my living for the most part, but I absolutely teach leadership to people who are not actually quote unquote leading groups or
Yeah.
organizations or things like that too, because the methodology here is that if you want to make change in the world, you have to recognize that leadership is necessary, influence is necessary, and they're learned skills. They're not things you're just born with, unless you are born with a lot of money.
Yeah.
Then
Yeah.
then the influence is baked in. But
Or maybe it's
but
Maybelline, but sure.
But barring being born with a fancy last name, I think that we have to recognize that if you want to actually affect other people and not just yell at other people on the internet, which is not really affecting change for anyone,
Yeah.
then you have to learn the skill of leadership. And to do that, there's a lot of pieces to it. It is definitely much like business leadership. People wake up one day and go, I think I'll start a business. I think I'll be a leader. And they just think they know how to do it already.
Hmm.
But we
Yeah,
don't. These are
indeed.
skills that need to be had. They need to be gained and thought about and contemplated like anything else.
Yeah, of course, as you're talking about maybe a wise implementation of power, and there still is, and there certainly isn't a debate, but it brings up in me the sense that only a few people can have power, but anyone can have strength. And there is something, I think, as what you're saying, is to find a particular type of strength that is applied in a particular direction with creativity and with empathy and with care. That because power doesn't necessarily mean power over, though it can, but anyone can be strong. And strength is not just implemented through physical bending of bars or implementing your will over someone, but there's a kind of steadiness and a smallness to strength that makes it available to anyone in surprising ways. So what I hear
Mhm.
you saying, well, you're using the word power, and I know what you mean. I think anyone who's listening would hear that too. But something about the skill of strength, not just developing it, but finding it and finding co-creatively ways to
It's
implement
not
it
just
around
finding it, it's getting
making it.
okay with wanting it.
Sure.
That's actually a good idea to be strong and
Yeah.
knowledgeable as a leader and as someone who exerts their influence
Yeah.
in ways that they can really comprehend and contemplate the values both that they possess and the values of those who they might be trying to convince.
Yeah, of course.
And it's more important than ever right now, I would
It's
say.
more than
But
important than ever that right now. I would completely agree with you. You know, in the course, you in the first week, the first session, you talk about discovering your leadership style, and I think this goes to what you were just saying about people think you can just do it, and we don't without going through the course materials because people should absolutely take the course. I guess I'd ask you about leadership style because it can feel like I like things to be organized, or we should definitely do this. What's the difference between leadership style and personality style?
what's interesting is when I work with somebody, the best way I can do this without just diving into the coursework is
No, please don't.
when I talk to people who are first-time leaders or they're in a leadership role, which for this purposes, let's say you get a promotion where you have somebody working under you for the first time. The divide between how people do that and their actual personality and values is very often incredibly vast because they do whatever someone in that role did before them. There's a lot of just common follow the leader because that's what's culturally accepted. Like back in the early days of my career, I worked many retail jobs and I used to watch people that would get promoted to supervisory positions. And this works in kind of any industry. And I think we've probably all seen it. And I think that most people would find this pretty relatable that like someone gets promoted and then they used to be your friend and they used to be somebody you shared values with and hung out with and enjoyed your time with. And then suddenly they got promoted and it's like Jekyll and Hyde.
Hmm.
Now they are telling you what to do and they're barking orders and they implement fear and humiliation and authoritarianism and all of these things that are just exceedingly common because again, most people don't learn an actual skill of leadership. They just learn how to wield fear and humiliation and it goes all the way back to our school systems, right? Like it's
Sure.
we are punished by rewards. Alfie Kohn, we've talked about
Alfie
that book a
Cohen.
couple of
Yeah.
times, right? Like it's the idea of that we are trained from a very early age. The only way anything gets done is by either humiliating someone or getting them to be afraid of you. And it's simply not true at all. And I don't even think it's human nature, but it is like a very much follow the leader part of our culture. So when we go from personality to leadership style, that's a very common leap. Wonderful people can be absolutely atrocious and terrifying leaders, and they don't see the divide
Yeah. Yeah.
unless it's pointed at. So when we talk about that's why we start the course with what's your leadership style and understanding what the different types are and so we can look at it and start making conscious choices about what type of a leader we want to be and what happens when we don't make those choices. And
Yeah.
I think that our current culture is indicative of a whole lot of people not making conscious choices about how they want to lead in
For
all
sure.
kinds of ways on both sides of the aisle. So,
On all, yeah, wherever the aisles are, and just not just
yeah,
political spaces, of course. Um,
absolutely.
it's interesting to me that the word leadership itself, without doing a Stillman leap into etymology, it ends in the word ship, and of course, ships you need a ship to get to an atoll. But I'm wondering if there's other ships, states of or manners of traveling that you consider to be related to leadership. So friendship,
Mm.
mentorship, those are just two. But just in terms of laterally thinking about the ecology of leadership, and it doesn't have to, I don't want to force you into the box of pick a word that ends in ship or make one up, although from a poetic perspective, maybe we're interested in those. But if there's just in terms of having people come to know you, and look, the people who are listening to this, who are lucky enough to hear your voice, I've been lucky enough to hear yours for a very long time. And you dear to me in more ways that I could count. And of course, I could recount your professional accomplishments of an MBA and 20 years of business coaching and all kinds of capacities in helping hundreds of people make sense of some of the ways they're trying to proceed in the world that looks like trying to quote unquote make a living and do good in the
Mm.
world. And I can make that case, and I would. But people who don't know you, and if they're lucky and have the timing work out, will get a chance to walk with you for a little while in this course. Yeah, what other sort of blank ships are live in the ecology of leadership?
Funny enough, my brain has decided to fixate on one, which is
Okay,
the only one, which actually is not quite accurate. And that was Mothership.
totally.
In and easy to
Jefferson
go with the
Starship,
like.
sure.
I think I actually, while you were talking, I'm thinking to myself, is mothership? No, mothership is not actually a word when not relating to, oh, the mothership is coming to take me away. But
But it's also
but
this
as a mom,
the state of being a mother, of course.
yeah, I think that's the one that comes easiest to me.
Yeah,
I have a daughter, and I would say mothering is definitely taught me more about leadership than any of those other accomplishments that you rattled off, which certainly were illuminating and educational. But I think mothering teaches me about leadership every day, and certainly about empathetic influence.
yeah,
Because I think if you aspire to be a calm parent, one who doesn't yell and one who understands your children and leads them towards something that they want instead of leading them towards something that you want, then empathy is something that's like it is an active practice every single day. My daughter's one that has she is full of big beautiful feelings. She's not a tantrum thrower, but she's just emotional and sweet in all the most beautiful ways. And hearing her and understanding what she's experiencing has it teaches me about patience and empathy, and also recognizing that I have to deploy those things when I'm wielding influence over her and trying to get her to eat some freaking broccoli
sure.
or literally any green thing ever into her amazing little body.
Yeah.
It's
But it's not just about defeating her will.
exactly, and that's the thing, right? And those things are the ones that come easy because again, it's follow the leader like anything else. We were eat your broccoli or else. Eat your broccoli because I said so. Then the bribery comes, then the threats come, then I'll take things away. Like all of those things that I'm sure a lot of us experienced as children, even when we had great parents. Those were the tools deployed of parental leadership. And I've always aspired not to do that. And so we have a lot longer conversations about things, and it's certainly the hard road of parenting. It's not the easy way.
Yeah, because
But
it's
it's
certainly
a
possible to parent like the people in Kauai said, this is what we're going to do, and here's how we're going to get
mhm,
there because it's destination oriented, and we're not
mhm.
willing to take side roads or find different destinations to find out, like,
Yeah.
oh, you don't like broccoli, but you do broccoli banana cake. Huh, okay, interesting.
My marker for this with my daughter is that when I was a kid, I couldn't wait to be an adult because the adults were the ones that had the power. They got to
Mm,
make the choices.
yeah,
And that's all I wanted. I was terrible at being a child. I never liked playing. That wasn't my thing. I couldn't wait to be a grown up. And my daughter talks about it all the time. She'll start to cry sometimes at bedtime because she's mad that she has to grow up because she loves being a kid so much
yeah, and little.
because we afford her power. She's not powerless in her life.
Hmm,
And she gets to exert an opinion and she gets to be in on the conversations that affect her. And I think
Yeah.
that matters. And I think in any kind of leadership that matters. So I try to teach that way, and I try to run my business that way, and I try to help other people understand what that can be. Because it is certainly a skill set that I have gained both in through my business work and through lived experience as a mom of a sweet and sensitive little girl.
Yeah. But thank you for that. And of course, I have a great affection for Rosie and your family as well. But it's one thing to have the skills at whatever level you have, and there's not any sort of some sense of mastery of them. But it's another
Hmm.
thing to be able to teach them. You could be an amazing potter or an amazing carpenter and not actually know how to stand alongside next to someone and show them how to do that. And of course, there can be some sort of osmotic force where you're with someone who knows about it and doesn't have to specifically teach you, but you're like, oh, I see it. I don't even realize the things I'm learning. But
Hmm.
something that you've really worked on and I think have come to do well is to know how to disseminate the things that you've come to learn and also open it enough to know the things that are the limits of your knowledge, but have enough things to know to say, here's how we can approach kind of the mystery and the unknown without definitive answers. And that's one of the many things that I could say are one of your features in coming to a course like this, because you aren't a master leader. You are a skilled practitioner of leadership.
I would agree with that. Yeah. I'm not even sure if a master leader is actually a thing, right? It feels to me very much like being a leader is a forever practice, and it is
Hmm.
a forever learning experience. And that would be my hope. That's where I can get anybody I teach this to, whether in this course or my one-on-one clients and consulting clients. That's always what I aspire to, is recognizing that this is lifelong, that leadership is something that's in ourselves and it's always evolving and it's not static.
Yeah.
And that has definitely asked a lot of me in figuring out how to teach that. Teaching people how to learn it's not easy. It's not
It is
easy to
not
take
easy.
responsibility for that. And I love it. I love teaching. And I'm really excited about this course because I haven't gotten to teach this way in this kind of format, this material before. So I put this together special for Rowe, and I'm really excited about bringing together people that are not necessarily my like ordinary orbit, because most of the people that follow me are more business owners and those types. And I'm really looking forward to seeing who gathers for this,
Yeah.
because I do love teaching, and I love the idea that some very small lessons that are very actually easy to understand can make such a huge difference in
Yeah.
how people move through the world and how we experience challenge,
I'm glad you
when you
mentioned
feel
that
like you
because yeah, I'm really glad
yeah,
you
go
mentioned that
ahead.
because you do have such in your professional spaces, not to say this isn't professional, around business, and that you're actually speaking to this more as maybe, let's say, part of a human making skill. If someone who's been listening to this is thinking, huh, this might be a good idea, without turning this into a marketing pitch, because it's not, because it's getting to know you and having you become to know be known by the people who have thought that Roe is a good idea for a long time. What sort of tickle in somebody's heart or gut might they be tracking to think, huh, this might be a thing to read the description of and maybe roll the dice on and think this might be a good idea for me now? What sort of senses or things that might be happening in someone's
Mm,
life without being able to predict what people's lives or days or
sure.
conditions are?
Given that marketing is what I do, I'll
Yeah,
try hard not to make this a pitch, but it comes naturally. So if you want to get to know me, that is certainly part of how I communicate because it is what I do all day, every day. But I think that right now, in this moment, I think I can make a general assumption that most of the people listening are struggling with, how did we work this hard to get where we are now in this
mm,
culture? How did we fight this hard and have such righteous messages and righteous causes, and yet here we are feeling powerless? That seems to be the refrain that I hear a lot from clients, from friends, from colleagues. The like, what do we do now? That sense of powerlessness. And I think that this course is really well suited to meet that moment. It's interesting because we designed the course before things got real sticky culturally. And yet it seems to meet the moment really perfectly and beautifully, in my opinion. And so if you are sitting there feeling like you don't know what to do next, and you don't know how to keep caring and being the caring, empathetic person that you are and still exist in this world of madness in so many ways and fear, this course will help you figure out what to do next and create a practice that can build that sense of having power and being able to see the difference between I can't do anything because I don't know what to do and I don't have any power, and actually going, I can see a path forward. I can see a way in which I can still affect change, or I can still help other people, or I can still help myself, or I can still help my family, and I can survive this.
Yeah.
If that feels like a good idea and something you need, that is what I aspire to take people to in this work.
Maybe, and of course, knowing you well enough and to tell anyone who's listening, this isn't just theory and you lecturing. This is engaging. This is practical, not a burden in the sense of that you're sent home with having to organize 10 million things and demonstrate efficacy or outcome or output in a particular way. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah.
I know part of the answer to this question, but I know that part of the reason why you decided to offer this course at Rowe is because of our long relationship. And Alana and I have known each other for a really long time in lots of different spaces, and I'm very blessed. I consider her part of my spirit wealth. But you also must have looked at Rowe yourself. And even though you may never have shuffled your feet up up the road towards the farmhouse or on Kings Highway Road in Rowe, Massachusetts, you must have looked around and looked at other programs outside of our connection. I think that it was a good idea. And I myself have a long history at Rowe, which anyone who wants to know, I'm very happy and proud to tell of that, which I've been braided around Rowe since 1986. Uh,
Mm.
What was it about Rowe as you looked at it from a distance that made it seem like a good idea to bring this kind of grace to our digital corner of the world?
That's a great question. I have looked at other places that offer similar kind of courses and workshops and things like that. And one of the things that stands out to me about Row is that it has a really diverse and intelligent approach to the courses that it offers, they're varied and they're rich and they are not just one thing. It feels like a space that welcomes a lot of perspectives and feels like a place for grounded individuals who want to make change in the world. That is the sense that I get, and want to exist in something that is perhaps empowering outside of the normal ways in which we gather knowledge and power. And I like that. It feels holistic, and I like the history of the place and the fact that anything that has made you feel at home for that long, I'll basically follow Matt anywhere. So that's the truth. Is if Matt says it's great, then I believe him.
Yeah, but you had to,
That's
but you trusted, but you verified, and you did
I
look.
did. I did look. Yeah. And what's funny as a business person, I don't often get invited to spaces like Row because I think business is this like funny, like it's capitalism is like a dirty word among us do-goody hippie types. And as somebody like you mentioned my MBA, I have an MBA in sustainable enterprise from a very hippy dippy school. And it was really interesting to be the capitalist cohort among a group of people who are teaching consciousness and all kinds of activism and things that feel very anti-capitalistic. And I liked that Roe has invited me here to this space and with a sense of recognition that money is not going anywhere.
Yeah,
Like we have to exist in this is the soup that we swim in, and understanding and working within the systems that we work within is both valuable and necessary because it's not going to just change overnight. And I think that there's a culture around capitalism that can change, but only if we culturally recognize that you can't turn an aircraft carrier around on a dime. This is a slow process and it requires new skills and new education. And so I felt The fact that Rowe wanted to have a businessy type like me here to do this work with, hopefully with lots of people, felt that alone made me want to be in this space, because that tells me a lot about the leadership at Rowe.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Alana. I'll just say to anyone
Mhm.
else who's listening that, as I have mentioned, I've known Alana for a long time, and you'd be lucky to have a chance to spend time with her over these 4 sessions that start March 22nd. Check out rowcenter.org. Over the years of knowing Alana, I have dev devised reasons to hire Alana to help me think clearer about these issues and ones adjacent to them. So do yourself a favor and go to rowcenter.org, scroll down to all the programs, but certainly to Alana's, and take a look. And we look forward to seeing you online and in person. Thanks,
Thank you so much, Matt.
of
It
course,
was a pleasure as always,
as
and
all.
I hope I get to spend some time with a bunch of folks from Rowe. I'm really looking forward to doing this.
Yeah, so to you, Alana, and
Yeah.
to you, anyone who's listening, blessings to your hands and to your homes from this corner of the internet to yours.